titles don't build generational wealth, ownership does. And at HACE, we've worked with tens of thousands of Latino professionals, and the most reliable wealth levers that we've seen are tied to ownership. And so what we mean by that is the negotiating for equity, stock options, profit sharing, restricted stock units, not just chasing the higher titles, because those type of ownership opportunities can translate into long-term wealth. And the other that I would add is the retirement benefits are also critical, which is why the work that we're doing with Phoenix, we also embed that within HACE and intersect as well, because when Latinos can fully access and maximize their employer 401k matches, that can easily create almost seven-figure portfolios over a career, right?
You're listening to Moneda Moves, a podcast where we cover the intersection of money and cultura. I'm your host, Leon Alfaro, an award-winning producer, Forbes contributor, and founder of Moneda Moves. Now, if you're new to Moneda Moves, welcome. If you're coming back, Moneda Moves is evolving. And now, we're not just talking about assets and cash, we're talking about capital in all of its forms. Financial, social, political, and cultural. Because Latinos are powerful, resilient, and at the forefront of building the systems our communities need to thrive today. From mutual aid networks to nonprofits, from entrepreneurs to innovators, we're rewriting what growth looks like. And let's be clear, a podcast like this has never been more important. Our stories, our strategies, and our poder deserve the mic. Here we'll highlight Latinos shaping business, redefining our relationship with money, and fueling the American economy. We'll increase transparency around dinero, celebrate achievements, and share the playbooks that move our comunidades forward, not just in the US, but at a global scale. Join me weekly this season as we feature new entrepreneurs and innovators, and those building alongside us. No te lo quieras perder.
¿Qué tal, mi gente? Welcome to another episode of Moneda Moves. Joining me today is Patricia Mota, President and CEO of the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, based right here in Chicago. And it's such a pleasure to have Patricia today on the show. We've had the pleasure of intersecting in a couple of events ranging from corporate to financial literacy to, I believe, chief and women's leadership just last year during Latina Equal Pay Day. So it's such a pleasure to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, Patricia, there is also overlay, not just in the spaces that we transit today, but in a little bit of our history. So I'd like to start there. You're a proud first-generation Mexican-American from East Chicago, Indiana. You are daughter of immigrants, and your life, as I read, was very much influenced by the educational inequities that you saw after moving to Arizona at the age of 16, and experience that then fueled you to create opportunity for others. And whoa, let me just say, I can relate to that so heavily growing up in Chicago, where we see this system of inequities here in Chicago, one of the most segregated cities in the country. And you can see that people that live in different neighborhoods have access to different quality of education. Even though it should be something that everyone has access to. So tell me a little bit about growing up and just kind of growing up, child of immigrants, growing up, seeing the education system before you. You're obviously in a very powerful position today with HACE, but how did that shape the way that you viewed the world and leading to how you are and where you are today?
Yeah, it was a monumental moment. And that experience, I always tell people that I lived the education gap, the access gap that exists in this country, in the United States, where both public high schools that here in the same country, right, that based on socioeconomic status and the neighborhood, right, that I was in, meant what I was afforded to in terms of access and resources and information. You talk about colleges and universities that were recruiting us from all over. My new high school versus my original was predominantly the military and the community college. Talk about the academic rigor was on a different level, where I was placed to learn in AP classes, and it was completely different. The access to my guidance counselor was completely different. And so that was very monumental in the sense that it not only did I experience it, but then I started to know back then that I wanted to be that person to help close those gaps that exist, not only in education, but then fast forward when I got into my career and realized some of the challenges that as a first generation college graduate, as a Latina, as a woman, some of the challenges that and the gaps that exist. I think that, with the daughter of immigrants, my father came here as a farm worker and would come back and forth from Mexico to be able to provide. And my mother came with her grandparents. My grandfather came to work in the steel mills and inland steel. And my parents met in Chicago, and we all grew up in East Chicago. And so I think their hard work and their perseverance, so that they've done, and that my grandparents really instilled some values of perseverance, but also of humility. I think that working really hard and, kind of doing what they need to do to provide for the family, but also pushed education. Like my parents weren't necessarily sure how to go about it necessarily, but all of my siblings and I, they made sure that they wanted us to go to college, right? They wanted us to kind of do the things that they weren't able to do. And so that was a really strong core value for us growing up. And I would also say that perseverance and that humility and faith, growing up in a Catholic household, that it was like, si Dios quiera, and
That's what we always
going
say.
to church. Yeah, going to
Yeah.
church every Sunday. But even to this day, my parents pray the rosary every single day. And I think that has been my faith, whether I may not be a formally practicing Catholic the way we did growing up. I am a strong believer of faith, and that no matter how much fear and that there's out there, because fear causes uncertainty and action, and I always take myself back to faith, because to actually take action, to make decisions, to build coalitions, and to make sure that what we need to do, leaning into that strongly.
A lot of us that are children of immigrants, especially those that transit corporate
Hmm.
spaces, we transcend so many different spaces, right? It's like, which
Yeah,
version of
yeah.
you do you want? Do you want the daughter of immigrants version? Do you want the religious and having faith version, corporate version? We're all one and the same, but we do have to transit so many environments, which makes the question all the more loaded. So I appreciate
Hmm.
you sharing everything that you did, and how education seeped into your life. I can tell just by looking at where you've been, right? Like one of your earliest pieces of career items that you have on your resume is being in Ivy Tech Community College in Central
Hmm.
Indiana and assistant director of admissions. You said, "Hey,
Hmm.
I see problems with the education system and access to
Yeah.
education," and you got in there. You wasted no time. So I really respect that. And that brings me to my next question, which has to do around institutions, and
Mm.
how we carry ourselves in different institutions, right? Now, these institutions, as you highlighted and your experience growing up in Arizona highlighted, they're not equal opportunity
Hmm.
distributed. So, not everyone gets access to them in the same way. And so, that highlights the history behind the institutions, which means that they were built by and for,
Hmm.
not necessarily with a survey, a holistic survey of everyone involved, right? And
Yeah.
so at
Yeah.
times that means perhaps people like us were excluded, right? Daughters and sons of immigrants. How have you found is a successful way to navigate these institutions that weren't built with us in mind?
Yeah, I consider myself an advocate for access and equity, and not just because of the personal experience I shared earlier, but because of everything that you just mentioned. I am a product of resources, of programs, of organizations that have met me where I am, whether it's financial support through scholarships or whatnot, or whether it's through tutoring or programs to help me as a first generation college graduate. Um, I am a product of equity. And I think that one of the ways that we help institutions, or as I am personally navigating these institutions, whether it's the boards that I serve, the corporate partners that we work with, is ensuring that they are meeting individuals, meeting community where they are, right? And providing the programs, the resources, the support. That's one facet of it. The other one is you talk about dismantling these structures and institutions that have been there takes a lot of work, right? And making sure that they are inclusive and creating a sense of belonging for everyone at the end of the day. And I think that at the time of place where there's a lot of anti diversity, equity, and inclusion rhetoric, it's those that are truly in the work are doing it, right? Versus just worried about the messaging. And so the silver lining in all of this is that those that are the companies and organizations that truly are doing the work, and many of which partners that we're working with are doing the internal work, the dismantling, and really taking, looking. It's hard, and which is why I see a bigger opportunity with startups and with, companies and entrepreneurship, because you get to really build the culture and the environment that you can. And that's where I think Latinos and where underrepresented communities have a huge opportunity right now to really, if they're a founder, if they're starting up or considering it, that I do think that there's huge opportunity for that right now.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up entrepreneurship because that is a lot of what we talk about here at Moneda Moves. And Latinos have been historically big drivers in the entrepreneurship space, sometimes through resilience and survival and the need for it,
Yeah.
and sometimes through innovation. I've gotten to a certain level of stability where now I can actually ideate and innovate in certain
Hmm.
environments that perhaps 2 generations ago wouldn't have been deemed possible in your lineage. So I think that that's incredible because that's what startup culture is all about. It's about
Yeah.
innovation. It's about building for the next gen, right? So
Mm.
you yourself, I'll come back to Ase because I have more questions there, but
And
you
I think,
co-founded. Yes,
yeah, but you touched on that next gen, and I think the other piece of this dismantling or the structures is the speaking up, right? So it's up to all of us to make sure that we're speaking up when voices are missing, building bridges across communities, and redesigning
absolutely.
these systems so that they fully reflect the richness of the talent that we bring to the table. And then you talk about the next gen, right? I think I have 8 nieces and nephews, my goddaughters, my great nephew that I have. It's about ensuring that we're leaving this world a better place, right? These structures, these
Absolutely.
organizations better for them at the end of the day.
Absolutely, 100%. And I mean, I might even correct myself there. And it's like, it's not just the next gen, it's the now gen
The
too,
current,
right?
yeah.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you look I mean, I know I have another question lined up for you, but you mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion. Three words that, like, a lot of organizations have taken a step back this year because of
Mm-hmm.
executive orders put in place that currently strictly applied to federal agencies, but
Yeah.
a lot of private companies took a step back from that and otherwise. And so to still use those words, I think harps on something very important, which is narrative, the importance that is America, that
Yeah.
America is diverse. If you look at the country and if you look at the makeup of the census, that is the reality that we're faced with.
Yep.
And so while there's these retraction of these words, you look at the reality of what this country is and how is diversity not American? It is
Yeah.
the most American, right? And so I'm wondering if you have anything to add there when it comes to
Oh my
language and the
goodness.
importance of language.
The thing is that there needs to be more awareness. One is to understand that DEI is not exclusionary of anybody, anyone,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
It means everyone at the end of the day. And so I think that's been part of the rhetoric. And at the end of the day, I think, it's whatever messaging that you're using, and we're meeting our corporate partners or partners where they are, is that the work is still continues, and making sure that we're holding ourselves and we're holding them accountable, that what it is intended to do, what DEI is intended to do, whatever you end up calling it, that work still continues, right? We at ASE, we continue to use the language. We're creating awareness and education around what it is and what it is not. And at the end of the day, it means everyone, that in terms of, and that's what diversity is about, right?
Yeah, I think that's a solid highlight. Now, I wanted to ask you because you mentioned
Hmm.
entrepreneurship, and I know that you're
Hmm.
a co-founder of SheNext. We had your co-founder on the podcast not too long ago, Olga Camargo. Now, SheNext is a
Hmm.
fintech app that is an educational app as well, that is being used to help close the Latina wealth gap. So, talk to me a little bit about the power of building a startup and how you view that as a tool to move progress forward.
Yeah, look, you talk about the Latina wealth gap, and that is very real and compounded by the inequities of funding. When we look at, let's say, the entrepreneurs or founders that are looking for support, and I think the things that that we're seeing is what's working is diversifying in terms of looking at the different funding models. I think at Sheenex and through partners and organizations like HACE, I chair the board of Digital Undivided, which helps women founders as well, and with access to funding. And it's about building these bridges, but ultimately like the ecosystem thinking, the ecosystem building, where we need, the investors, the companies, community leaders all pulling together to really close the gap. And as it pertains to Sheenex, I think, you've had Olga Camargo, our co-founder Juan Carlos Avila as well. We're self-funded right now. I think we made the decision that we're going to bootstrap and make the personal investments because this is personal to us and very personal. I know you've heard Olga's story because of our own experiences and because of the need that's out there. And so, and it's today we're proud that Sheenex is now 75% bilingual as well. So
That's
we've brought
amazing.
in the scope, and we brought in the scope to include talent like college students and new entrants into the workforce, small businesses, parents with students, all of whom now have this dedicated platform and their own dedicated space and square, as we call it, within the Sheenex app that speaks to their own financial education needs. So this is the equity, right? We're meeting parents where they are, we're meeting the students where they are, and being inclusive where we welcome everyone to be part of the platform to help them make those informed financial decisions, not just for themselves, but as we know, is like when you impact an individual, you impact their families, the businesses, and the communities that we represent.
Yeah, absolutely. That chain reaction is always so impressive to see in the Latino community. That information really multiplies. And I'll just drop a mention that Latina Equal Pay Day in 2025 is on Wednesday, October 8th. And
Mhm.
I know that we're recording this ahead of then, but that wealth gap is immense. In past years, it has been at, I think, 54, 55 cents to the dollar. So that is something to absolutely keep track on, especially because depending on where you look, in Latinas are very
Mhm.
diverse, right? Depending on where you look,
Yeah.
it can widen as well. So that's absolutely something to keep tabs on, and which is why financial literacy matters now more than ever.
100%.
Um, Layer on everything that's happening, of course, in the news.
Yeah, and,
But
and and when I
yeah,
say close the gap, we need to accelerate and then some, right? Because we need to make up for this loss of potential wealth that Latinas have, experienced, especially if you're first generation college graduate or going into, the professional workforce is just like a huge need to make up for that, right?
yeah, yeah, completely agree. Now, I want to ask you about ASE as well, because we
Hmm.
were talking about building for the next gen. And
Hmm.
ASE has trained and placed tens of thousands of Latino professionals, which is absolutely incredible when you think about the Latino population in the US. What have you seen as most reliable workplace levers for Latinos to build real wealth? So, not just higher titles, but equity, building towards retirement, ownership, and what gaps are still the ones that are biggest that haven't budged?
Yeah, I love that you said that, titles don't build generational wealth, ownership does. And at ASE, we've worked with tens of thousands of Latino professionals, and the most reliable wealth levers that we've seen are tied to ownership. And so what we mean by that is the negotiating for equity, stock options, profit sharing, restricted stock units, not just chasing the higher titles, because those type of ownership opportunities can translate into long-term wealth. And the other that I would add is retirement benefits are also critical, which is why the work that what we're doing with Sheenex, we also embed that within ASE and Intersect as well. Because when Latinos can fully access and maximize their employer 401k matches, that can easily create almost seven-figure portfolios over a career, right?
Yeah, yeah, real.
Home ownership, entrepreneurship. So, which is why I love that now 5 years we've been doing Mujeres Asset Entrepreneurship Program, which helps not only strengthen but scale their businesses so that we can support them and help them not only with hiring, but building economic stability and wealth for themselves as well. But the gaps, right? You talked about the gaps there, they still exist. We talk about Latinos being not represented in leadership positions. We still have within the corporate executive roles, the 4 to 5% mark that we see, and Latinas, the 1%, right? It's like
Yeah.
we gotta really, and we're really striving to break that and help break the barriers that Latinas, Latinos, are facing, and especially from industries and such as tech, finance, sense where equity is common, right? So it's like trying to get into these industries. And then, the other impact or what really matters is the networks, which is why organizations like HACE and many others, but making sure that we can get ourselves not only to those senior level roles, but board seats. I think, paid board seats, advisory roles, and investment opportunities. And so that's why we work with a lot of the employers that we have partnerships with to not only build that type of inclusive culture, but to ensure that as part of that, you're providing these type of opportunities available, helping sharing the education and the awareness to be able to make equity and transparency part of their culture. And why we're telling Latinos to advocate not just for titles, but for ownership, right? Like a part of enhancing your career is not just the titles. And again, we consider everyone to be a leader at the end of the day. It's like, but how are you doing that effectively to build wealth for yourself, your family, and the communities that we represent?
Yeah, I mean, across the board, ownership becomes so important, right? Like you said, when you talk about equity, when you talk about stocks, that's
100%.
ownership of the stock. Home ownership, that is it has it in the name, it is
Yeah.
ownership. And so I wanna ask you, just like for like a little bit of a temperature check slash a sobering response to what we're seeing in the news, which
Hmm.
is corporate companies are currently being kind of corralled into a corner following executive orders earlier this year. I saw this, and this was earlier in the year, but McDonald's settled a lawsuit challenging a Latino scholarship program. These are
Hmm.
real viable opportunities that we're helping the Latino population in the United States get ahead. From where you're
Yep.
sitting, how is that impacting the community? Like how big of a movement has this turned into when it comes to the Latino pipeline and moving them along in corporate?
Oh my goodness, it's such a loaded question. I feel the entire podcast could be about this. I think that, you mentioned the McDonald's scenario, that one, and on the boards and the organizations that I'm a part of, I would, and if you haven't done so already, and this is what McDonald's did and they dropped the lawsuit, was make sure the requirements for any scholarship, any program doesn't require, say, must be Hispanic or Latino, right? It's that has to be in the requirements. So that's one way to make sure that you are not legally, approached or given a lawsuit so that you're not doing it. And that's what we do with ASE. And we've always had that in terms of our program requirements. Now we're just a lot more vocal and blatant. So all the great programs and organizations out there, if you haven't done so already, just make sure that you're getting that legal support. There's a lot of pro bono. The other thing that has come to mind, and I've been having a lot of conversations, is just this week, the funding that cuts that were done to Hispanic serving institutions, minority serving institutions. And we already saw this coming down the pipeline, and you're already seeing universities cut back in terms of resources and scholarships, which is
Yep.
why it's even more critical. We talked about this with some of the leaders earlier this week from other organizations that like Alpha, Prospanica, ACE, Naleo, all these other organizations that we've been talking to, that we get the support to double down on student scholarships and efforts. Because if the universities or these other resources are going to be cut, then we want to make sure that leverage our organization so that we can provide them. We've seen the uptick of students applying to our university leadership program. We don't have enough programs for them. Like we need additional financial resources, because if they're not going to get it at the university, they can get it through ASE. And we're hearing that from the students firsthand. And we want to be there to support them, especially in a time and place that we're in now, because it's not just about getting the leadership development or the educational stipend or the dollars. It's about the comunidad that's needed more than now ever, so that you can lean into one another, empower, support, inspire. Because hey, it's pretty hard right now, especially when you're in this type of work. It's really tough, and you need to make sure that you're constantly leaning in so that you do that for yourself but for one another, right?
Yeah, yeah, no. Community goes a long way, even better when they supply you with resources. And Asset has both in your
Mm-hmm.
toolkit. I want to ask you about AI as well,
Mm.
because that is moving at breakneck speed. And at a global level, right? It's pushing and transforming all of the jobs and fundamentally the way we work, eventually the way
Mm-hmm.
we live. And I listened to
Mm-hmm.
a really great podcast recently. It's called Diary of a CEO. They interviewed the former Google X CBO, Mo Goddard. And he
Oh,
spoke, yet I don't know
I love his
if you've heard
book.
this.
Yeah,
Oh
I
my
wrote in
gosh,
his
I
book
need
on
to read it.
happiness. So good.
I need
Yeah.
to, well, now I have a recommendation to take back. But he's a fascinating guy because he went on this podcast to talk about what AI could look like in a utopia and the dystopia we might be heading into. And this is not to be alarmist. This is just to look at the sobering reality of themes we cover in this podcast, the structural inequities that you and I both saw growing up in
Hmm.
different cities, and what happens when you pair that with technology that amplifies what's already there at breakneck speed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, how do we make sure that Latinos, and especially this crop of young Latinos, right? Like, Latinos are always talked about as the youngest audience segment in the US, the most potential. We're not even at the peak yet. How do you make sure they don't get left behind in this AI race?
Oh my goodness. It's so critical. And we've been thinking about this early on, so much so that last year, I worked with Dr. Cindy Gordon, who I saw a contributing author to Forbes, one of the first individuals that was talking about ensuring that AI is inclusive and that it's being looked at from a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens, right? Because it's moving at you said breakneck speed. It is, and if we are not ensuring that it's being built inclusively, meaning that there's people that look like you and me that are part of that, or are being considered, or are aware of that, then our community will be left behind, and there will be bias that will exist, right, as it pertains to these tools that are being built. That being the case, as it pertains to the workforce and the future of work, all of our programs, we're talking about AI, we're incorporating AI, ensuring that people know what certifications are out there, what free courses. There's so many, right? I think I did the Google one that was like a
Mm-hmm.
8 weeks, or there's a Coursera one, right? So don't be fearful of it. Like, we have to jump right in and leveraging it. Or, even with my staff, we're constantly talking about AI. How do we leverage it to amplify our work so that we can amplify our mission, right? And
100%.
spend the time doing that what we enjoy doing, and leveraging AI for parts of our job that perhaps are not as enjoyable or take a little more time. So, but it is, I think disruption is inevitable. But I think that inclusion is a choice, so we can either widen the gap or make this a moment where Latinos expand our voice and equity with AI. And so my advice is to our Latino professionals is, don't just react or be fearful of it, but let's skill up, right, and jump right in. Even if it's a podcast like the one that you mentioned that we're listening to, or certification, or just playing around with the tools that are out there, right, and getting comfortable.
Yeah, and I'll mention this because I usually don't bring up my day work as much, but I think it is super important to mention. I work in tech and I work a lot with AI in my work, specifically to market tools. I have to say, like, there is no better time to learn by trial and error, right? Like,
Mm,
right now we are talking about tools that are being kind of tweaked, changed, evolved every single day. And so now is the time to choose whatever suite you want of AI and
mm-hmm.
learn the suite, implement it into your processes. If you are a business owner, it has the ability to help you scale so much more. And then the other thing that I would say is it's going to be your partner, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
our contributions to AI will help shape it to some degree, not to the degree that the power makers have up top, which is why it's important that decision makers
Yeah.
have someone like you, like me in their corner, Patricia, but also, like, you interacting with AI teaches it something.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
And so whatever AI that you decide to work with, like, feed it, show it things, of course, that you, because privacy I'm sure is a concern, things that you'd be okay sharing with it,
Yeah.
but like, but use it to amplify, like you said, your message, because it's going to X whatever
Yeah.
is already there. So
And
I
I
think you
think
brought
part
up a
of
great point.
of using it and getting comfortable with it, I think that if I would share one thing that to get really great at and to hone in, is the prompts, right? Like, how do you get to what you're trying to get out of it, and the prompting it to get you what you're trying to get out of it, right? I think is
Yeah,
if you can hone in on that, versus like more of a basic question or general, then that's also
100%.
another, I think, tip that I've really appreciated.
Yeah, and a lot of it is trial and error and learning from your
Yeah.
peers. What have they done that have
Yeah.
worked, right? Like, a lot of that skill sharing. The one thing that evaporated from my mind very briefly, but I think is super important to mention, is we're seeing a crop of incidental developers because of AI.
Mm,
If you may have
mm,
heard of this thing called vibe coding, So vibe
Mm,
coding is when you use these enhancers, these AI enabled enhancers to make a beta version of an app, to code something, right? And so it'll give you one less than perfect. And you talk to developers and they'll be like, it's really less than perfect version of code. But I'm now meeting people that are like, hey, I made a beta version of an app. Whereas before you would have needed to expend a certain amount of budget in it, right? Like I don't see this as and I really do not want to see it replace developers. I think that they have a really particular and helpful area of expertise, but we're going to see a whole new crop of people that can now make things a reality. You're like make a
mm,
concept that they can show and show a
yeah.
professional, hey, this is what I want with all of the features. And
Wow.
founders are can make their ideas real, right? So I think that that's very cool.
That is.
Now, now, I wanted to ask you also about big
Mm-hmm.
changes that happened at ASE this year, and it's always so interesting to be plugged into the Latino community because, like I mentioned, we're big generators of new business, and We All Grow was a big business in the media and Latina space in the US. Now, if y'all are not familiar with We All Grow, it was what originally started as a blog platform that turned into a platform of influence and information led by Ana Flores and CEO'd most recently by Vanessa Santos. Recently, in earlier months, ASE partnered with We All Grow to steward the mission of Amigahood and bringing Latinas together everywhere. Now, I want to hear from you and your end how that came about, but also how ASE is carrying forward that mission, why it was a good partnership, because maybe other people might be listening to the podcast and considering similar moves. Like, how does that actually work and how did it come to fruition?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I think that cross collaboration with other organizations and relationships and building trust is critical. Had the honor of getting to know Vanessa, and then I knew the founder Ana Flores before, and even had built a relationship with her where we were collaborating on Latina Equal Pay Day on some initiatives together. So we had partnered, and then we were able to bring on Ana Flores, the founder, on our advisory council to help us with ASE, right? In terms of getting her being as an advisor for ASE as an organization. And so when the opportunity arose that this transition was happening, for me, having gotten to know what I knew then about the We All Grow and Amigahood community and the time and place that we're in today, we're like, we have to continue this community. We cannot let our Latinas down and say that this community no longer exists. So right away, it was an easy yes for us to say, like, yes, ASA is going to continue. We were able to bring in some of the community managers and the folks that were part of building and leading that ecosystem over to ASA. And our vision ultimately is that for the ASE Amigahood We All Go community is looking at it from a lens of where culture, community, and career development truly merge. It's not 100% perfect right now, but it was a decision that needed to be made fast and quickly. And again, in a time and place that we have to lean in terms of what's right and doing what's right, and obviously what's a sound business decision, but know that not all the things are fully perfect. And so I knew that what We All Grow brings to the table was something that could enhance what we do at ASIC. And then I knew that this community, what was asking for, what was asking Amigahood for, what they were wanting, we could support them with what ASIC brings to the table. So it was that seamless ecosystem where Latino are not just thriving, but are life lifting an entire network of professional ambition, community connections, and ultimately, just that ecosystem of support that flows back and really strengthens the collective power. And so I think that what we're doing with ASE and We All Grow through Amigahood is proving that you don't have to have necessarily separate lanes, but when you integrate, you unlock resources, additional resources, networks, and fuel real mobility. And so I think the real question is ultimately will be, are more folks are getting contracts for their businesses, or investing, building wealth for themselves and their families. And so the true success is going to be the outcomes of that, but also the pride of our culture and the power of community that directly is going to translate to increased economic opportunity and financial security for everyone at the end of the day. And so we're not just creating these connections. I think it's about shifting outcomes for generations to come. And I mentioned the collective advancement. The
Yeah. Yeah, you
where
did.
when Latino advances, everybody advances. The wealth engine in terms of the cultural pride, ambition, career growth, wealth, and so
So
amiga,
because I
yeah,
know I knew that We All Grow had,
yeah,
and I mean I don't have like all the numbers behind the scenes, but I knew that they had quite a big influence on Instagram and followers.
hmm
And then you combine that with ASE's tens of thousands of professionals that are being helped. I think I have more than 100,000. I need to get those updated figures from your end, but like I have, it's so many professionals that are being helped through ASE combined with We All Grow. I like that your answer was all about the business. It was all
hmm
about combined economic power, aka how do we continue to build wealth
yeah,
in this arena, and showing how collaboration is a strategic move to make that happen. And
yeah,
please do correct me on the numbers, but it's just like it's a combined power. And so I like that your answer was all about like, hey, here's what the transaction was, and the transaction showed
hmm
that we actually are stronger together at this point, at this
yeah,
junction for both
yeah.
organizations.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that especially, I can't say this enough, but in a time and place where we're in, and what Amiga had brought to the table in terms of doing, there's healing circles, there's like these candid conversations that the ASE community is benefiting from right now, right? And then vice versa, we were offering programs for entrepreneurs with our Mujeres ASE entrepreneurs, and a good majority of the We All Grow community are entrepreneurs and are able to leverage those resources with us as well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, big time.
Oh,
And yeah,
good.
I see like
Okay.
We All Grow Latina has close to 300,000 followers, and I know that that's not the entirety of their Instagram. And then I know Ase has served hundreds of thousands. So like I'm just adding that impact in my mind, knowing what a massive move that was. So congratulations to everyone involved, really, on the We All Grow side and on the Ase side. I want to talk to
Thank
you
you.
also about, of course, I want to talk to you about different ways of wealth building, right? Like we've talked about
hmm
assets, we've talked about ownership, and combining organizations to increase collective power. You also are very outspoken about the role of fitness and balance in your life. And right now, in a time of, for a lot of folks that might identify with a lot of the ways that you identify in the community, it's a time of response, right? There's things that are happening in our communities that are not normal. How do
hmm
we incorporate this balance, this fitness into our lives? What are the benefits really that you've seen kind of then show up in different areas of your life when that happens?
Yeah, I've been telling people that the weights that I've been lifting are heavier these days. I mean that literally and figuratively, but it's also I like to, challenge myself. I'm big into the strength training and running, but definitely strength training a lot lately. And I think that as things get tougher or stressful, if for some reason I am dropping the ball, or when I have in the past with my own physical health and wellness, it impacts everything, right? So I make it a priority to, to schedule it in, to ensure that, I'm getting my daily workouts. So for me, it's the exercise, it's the mindfulness, and that helps me with clarity, with stamina, especially in the tough times and high pressure environments. And so I think it's important for our community to really prioritize wellness, right? I think that we have a tendency of putting everybody else before ourselves, and working really hard, which is great. But I think that keep part of the mindset needs to be is that I'm going to do better at my job. I'm going to do better as a family member, as a partner, as a daughter, as a parent, right? When I take care of myself. And I think that because of that, I definitely have prioritized that. It's like health, you can't be wealthy if you're not healthy. Do you know what I mean? And so the other thing that I invested in this year, because I needed, and Alina, our board chair, Ase, she has one. And so she is the Aura Ring.
Oh
So
no way! I wondered when
yeah,
you were lifting your hand.
so let's do
How do
the
you like
Aura
it?
Ring. And so it's been helping me understand like how to do better with getting the right amount of hours of sleep, and that even though I may not sleep with what's out there, the tradition they say recommend the 8 hours or so, I it helped me just know that I'm getting quality sleep, right?
Yeah.
So but it also has, your heart rate, your activity, and all of that. And so I use that as part of my toolkit to make sure that I'm checking in on myself. And the one thing that I especially love about the Aura app, it's telling me that my cardiovascular health is 10 years younger than what I am. So
Oh
I'm
my
bragging about
goodness.
that to everyone.
I'm going to say it for the script reader that's going to be reading for any show notes or any notes that pop up online. Here's your Aura Ring ambassador, Patricia Mota. She's ready to take on the world. I love it. And so, Patricia, I love how you incorporate fitness into your life. Fitness is also very important to me. I also feel like sometimes when we're able to incorporate new challenges, right? Like you're saying, you're carrying heavier lifts or heavier weights
Yeah.
these days, but I work through mental challenges through that. You work through
Mm,
mental and through feelings through your body. We don't give it enough credit for how much it like runs all of our other faculties to be
mhm.
in good shape and to feed ourselves well and to also work out well. And to all folks thinking that you need like that $300 a month membership to the gym, you don't necessarily need that. Is what is my input here.
Yeah.
Wellness is not just meant for the wealthy, although I can understand if we're time poor that becomes more difficult, right?
Yeah.
But wellness is meant for everyone. And so I'm increasingly seeing more groups in Chicago pop up that exemplify that. Latina Swap Project, which will also be on this season of Moneda Moves.
Mm.
It is so important to incorporate wellness into your routine. Now, Patricia, I will end the podcast here as I do with all of our guests, and that's asking about your biggest money learnings of your life. What have they been for you? Please share.
Growing up, I knew that I didn't feel, and I didn't realize that how financially strapped we were, right? Um, but one thing that I've learned over time was learning to stop being afraid of asking questions or asking, um, for negotiating, or even admitting that I didn't know about investments or certain, things that I think sometimes we think that because maybe we have a specific, we're supposed to know it all, right? Or because we have a degree that we're supposed to know everything that entails. And so as I've gotten more comfortable asking questions, I've learned that initial hesitation has cost me opportunities, right? And so what I carry now is continuing to seek knowledge, asking directly, surrounding myself with people who know more, right? That I can learn from. My biggest go-to, as you could imagine, is Olga Camargo, right? Our founder and president and CEO for Shenex, that inspired us to really create a safe space where Latinas can ask questions, access tools, and not be penalized for learning. Not only did I learn personally, but having Mujeres de Hace cohort after cohort, that was one of the personal finance sessions where I've heard the struggles and how many Latinas learned the hard way for not asking, right? Or lost on so many opportunities along the way. And so this has taught me that silence is expensive, but knowledge and asking question pays compounding returns.
And that is a great note to end on. As we know,
Mm.
investment also gives compounding returns, and that certainly sounds like a wise one. Thank you so much, Patricia, for being on the show, and we really appreciate your presence.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, mi gente, for joining us this week on Moneda Moves. Before you go, please make sure to hit follow on this podcast so you can receive new episodes right when they are released. You can follow right now in the app you're using to listen to this podcast. Also, continue keeping cuentas and keeping tabs on our Latinx community and money moves via our free newsletter written by yours truly at monedamoves.substack.com. That's monedamoves.substack.com. I'll see you there. Hasta la próxima.